North of China in Central Asia lies the huge expanse of Mongolia with its untouched nature. This is the land of nomads and shamans. The land where men worship the gods of the sun and the moon, the earth and the sky. In the 16th century, Buddhism finally took root in Mongolia. In the face of such powerful landscape, temples would blend into nature. Töfkhön Monastery was built around a cave, a natural sanctuary hidden in the rock, made sacred by the presence of lamas who have come here to pray for centuries.
We meditate to discover ourselves. It's important to know oneself, to know one's mind. We ask ourselves, who am I? That's the goal of meditation. He who knows himself through meditation is able to master himself and find his path. This is how we can exist without suffering and live in peace. I am a master teacher here at the Töfkhön Monastery. I've been here since 1993.
Perched atop a rocky peak, the monastery's first wooden building was erected in the 17th century. It overlooks the Orkhon Valley, birthplace of the nomadic culture of the steppes. The unique site, known as Happy Secluded Place, is a renowned retreat for Tibetan Buddhist monks.
The natural environment of the Töfkhön Monastery means one does not come here by chance. One is driven to come here out of sincere desire and motivation. There is nothing but woods around. The place is solely designed for those who practice meditation. They can do so in utter tranquility. It's a separate world.
The remote location of Töfkhön preserved it from the throes of history. But other temples in Mongolia suffered a tragic fate. Over the centuries, Buddhism gradually spread across the vast Central Asian steppes in the wake of merchant caravans carrying silk and spice to the kingdom of the legendary emperor and conqueror, Genghis Khan. This is where he chose to set up his base camp and build the first capital of the Mongol Empire, Karakorum. 108 immaculate stupas, silent witnesses of a tormented history, trace a square in the middle of the steppe. They encircle the Erdene Zuu monastery, the first Buddhist center in Mongolia. Uranchimeg Tsultam, professor of Buddhist art at the University of California, often returns to her native land to study the origins of the monastery.
The site where Erdene Zuu is, even before other temples were built, big, huge gear was built for the founder, Abartai Khan, who is the descendant of Genghis Khan. And when he met with Dalai Lama in 1586, he was already stationed in that big gear. And it was so huge that a regular gear of nomadic people looked like a toy next to it.
Around his ger, Abba Töfkhön built the Erdene Zuu monastery, marking the establishment of Buddhism in Mongolia. His huge tent of canvas and wood became a portable monastery that moved across the steppe to spread the word of Buddha. All that's left of Abba Töfkhön's ger are the marks from its foundations, a huge stone circle inside the square enclosure walls, like a mandala.
Erdene Zuu was a very living organism. It really never stopped building. It began with its foundational gear, followed by building temples. And because it was never really stopped building, it built throughout 16th century, 17th century, 18th century, 19th century, and so on. It has a very variety of interesting architecture, all blended within the compound, enclosed by 108 stupas.
Erdene Zuu owes its name to 3 jewels, the 3 Zuu offered by the Tibetan spiritual leader at the time. 3 sacred images depicting the Buddha, for which it was customary to build a temple. In a land with no architectural tradition, Abba Töfkhön had to call upon the expertise of renowned artisans from China to provide a home for the priceless treasure. An odd vision in the midst of the steppe, these 3 temples fashioned upon the model of Chinese palaces line up in perfect symmetry. They proclaim the omnipotence of Khön. In the 18th century, the Khön, now both spiritual and political leader, built the Legendre temple in homage to his Tibetan counterpart. The temple evokes the spiritual and political influence of Tibet through its architecture, derived from the mountain temples of the Himalayan foothills. Unlike the stone temples of Tibet, Legendre Temple is built of fired brick and wood. A stupa rises in the center of the monastery. In these northern lands, the stupa is now called a chorten. Though its form evolved considerably during the long journey from India to Mongolia, the chorten has retained all the features of Buddhist cosmology. It represents both a human body and elements of the natural world. The foundation corresponds to the lower members linked to the earth. The dome at the level of the stomach symbolizes water. The 13 rings from the heart to the neck symbolize fire. The crescent that makes a head symbolizes air. At the top, the seed of supreme awakening is a gateway to the ether, infinite celestial space.
The stupa is usually for lamas, teachers, saints, and for Buddha relics. Here in Mongolia, they also worship the patrons of Buddhism and the Khöns, who were very important to bring Buddhism to Mongolia. So Abba Töfkhön, his grandson, and their queen, they were all enshrined in stupa in this compound.
The chorten became both a political and religious symbol, thereby abolishing the border between the sacred and the profane. The monastery transformed into an academy where generations of young nomads from the steppes learned to read and write and converted to Buddhism, abandoning their ancestral beliefs. At the start of the 20th century, nearly 1,500 monks prayed in the 65 temples within the walls of Erdene Zuu. More than half of the Mongolian population belonged to the clergy. Mongolia had become a theocracy modeled on Tibet. But in 1939, the Russian invasion of Mongolia sounded the death knell for the monastery. Erdene Zuu was the first victim of the unprecedented purge led by communists to eradicate Buddhism. The majority of the monastery's temples were destroyed and the monks executed. In the end, throughout Mongolia, the Soviets would execute 17,000 monks and lamas and would destroy almost every single one of the country's 2,000 temples. "70 years later, the monastery reopened its doors. The monks and people had found their religion again. The ritual of circumambulation takes place around the 108 stupas enclosing the sacred fortress of Erdene Zuu. It is led by Orshik Erdene Shulun, Grand Lama of Lavran Temple, to commemorate the anniversary of the Buddha's enlightenment.
We're the younger generation, and we've taken over the pursuit of religious activities. Every day for 70 years, the old monks officiated, read sacred texts, prayed, and carried out their rituals in secret. Now, we no longer need to hide, and we pray openly every day, especially on holy days.
Like every year, the villagers come carrying a priceless bundle. The sacred texts each family hid in their ger during the communist purge to save them from destruction.
It was my own decision to become a monk. It wasn't my family who decided. No one pushed me to do it. And I chose to go all the way through with it. My name is Sanchidijit. I began my studies here, in the Erdene Zuu monastery. I've lived at the monastery for 4 years. This year, I'm going to study at the Institute of Buddhist Religion in Ulaanbaatar. I'll be leaving soon. I like Erdene Zuu Monastery to remain the most important religious sanctuary. Once I've finished university in Ulaanbaatar, I'll come back to Erdene Zuu to work as a monk. My 2 teachers have a lot of confidence in me. I don't want to let them down. That's why I'd like to come back to Erdene Zuu and become a Grand Lama astronomer.
Like generations of young Mongolian nomads before him, Sanchidijit represents the monastery's present and future. Rooted for centuries in the Mongolian land, Erdene Zuu managed to survive the brutalities of history and the attempt to wipe out the sacred.